So I would like to welcome a off-the-cuff contribution from our colleague Jennifer Walkus from the Wikinew Nation, sharing some wonderful work about how we find balance between commercial interests, salmon communities, and our other than human relations. So thank you, Jennifer.
Hello, everybody. As you can see, I'm a little short too, so I kind of need the step-up stool. And I'm from a Wikinew Nation. We're a small nation in Rivers Inlet on the central coast of BC. We used to have one of the third largest population of sockeye salmon in Rivers Inlet. We averaged from 2 to 6 million sockeye. And so our life has changed quite drastically in the last 30 years or so. We had a salmon collapse in 1999. Go back a little further. It started in around the 70s when the population started to dwindle. Oh, this is my presentation. So TEK, Traditional Ecological Knowledge, Science and Policy Change. And this is the Wikinew village. And as you can see, we're a fjordal inlet with a fjordal lake. And our sockeye salmon were one of the biggest parts of our lifestyle. We had a collapse in 1999. Our salmon went from 300,000. The commercial fishery closed in 95 because the populations had dropped so much. And we still had enough then to eat. But then in 1999, we had a complete collapse. We had 300,000 the year before and 1,500 in the whole of the lake in 1999. And it really changed sort of our relationship with our salmon, with our bears. We had to kill 15 grizzly bears, and in my community, they live in the village. There's anywhere between 20 that actually live in and around the village, and we're okay with that. We've gotten quite used to it. We find that we really depend on one another, that the bears, they always said, had taught us what to eat, where to go. We have a lot of the similar needs. We're all omnivores. We have the same need for a lot of space. And it really brought forward the idea of nanakila. We need to look after someone, to look after the system, to look after everything. It's not just about us. It's about looking after everybody around us. And one of the biggest parts for me has been trying to find ways to use traditional ecological knowledge and Western science to change policy. The way Western science works is it really is very siloed. The people who manage bears, the people who manage forests, the people who manage fish. And our thought processes are very different, whereas in a Wikinew, we don't see them as separate. We see them as very much interrelated. And it's problematic when you try and take that to government. They don't have a way of, they have consultation obligations, but they've never put in ways that they are able to meet those. It's not in their interest to make sure that our rights are being presented in a way that they cannot ignore it, because that's usually what happens. We get the consultation after everything has been done, and they say, well, thank you for your input, and do it however they wanted to do it in the first place. And so what we started trying to do is look at how can we change policy, how can we move things forward. And one of the biggest things that we thought of is trying to figure out how to counter the government's arguments for doing nothing. Because they've always argued, well, we can't do it because of this, we can't do it because of this, we're managing according to the best available science, and all of these things we've all heard. And so we started talking about, well, how do we change that? And if government will only fund the science it wants to see, we have to find ways to fund the science ourselves. And we're lucky we're a part of the Great Bear Agreement initiative. So we have funding, we put a lot of land into protection, and as a part of that protection, we got some funding that is geared towards stewardship activities. We got access to carbon credits because of the amount of land that we've locked up into conservancies. And it gives us the opportunity to do science that most nations wouldn't necessarily have. We've done projects in cooperation with universities, with different organizations like the Hackeye Beach Institute, and we found ways to do things around early marine survival, trying to figure out what happens with our sockeye once they start getting out into the inlet. We've looked at bear management for salmon. This was a really big one for me. When we started looking at what happens with the bears in and around the village, especially post-collapse, we were finding out that government really didn't know how many bears we had. They didn't know how much fish bears actually eat. And so we started putting some of our money from the Great Bear Initiative funds towards, and this is what happens when they don't do it. Like when there's overfishing in the streams, then you wind up with times when the bears, through no fault of their own, don't get enough to eat. And so our biggest one was looking at the data, what happens. And so we look, you can see from 1948, you can see 4 million. In some of the early years, it was up to 6. You can see in 1996 when we had 1,500 come back, and you can see it hasn't recovered. And yet the commercial fishery is still trying to push to come back into the inlet when we haven't even reached a status of 300,000 consistently. This year, everyone else was getting these massive sockeye returns. We had 167,000. We pay for our own DIDS and ARIS system to count the salmon because we're a glacial stream, so you can't see the fish to count them. So we put some of our money into that. And we worked with a scholar, Megan Adams. She started out with her master's with us, ended up rolling into a PhD. And what we were looking at is we're looking at how to plan for bears within the DFO management system, because right now they don't. And the ones that end up suffering are the streams, because if you know how many salmon you've got, you know how many fish you've got, and you know how much fish bears eat, you can figure out the black line there is the plot of bear density, what happens for bears depending on how much food they have available. And the dotted line is the yield for salmon, and so what happens for that. And government doesn't plan this way. When we started looking at trying to find ways to ensure that we've counted predators into the system, our idea, because we already knew how much fish, how many bears there were, how much fish they eat, we thought by the time we start measuring bears and by the time they're into the streams, if we plan for the bears, the other predators will have had their turn already. And so we started looking at trying to plan for yields that will be under that green line. The government's line will be further down. I wish I had it on here. I wish Megan was here. But our theory was that if we don't plan for the bears as well as just the people, that it's the streams that end up suffering, because once the bears get into the system and people have took away that maximum sustainable yield, then we're fishing down the system. The salmon streams aren't getting enough to come back the next year as strong as they were before. So it's trying to find ways to work with DFO systems to make sure that economic priorities are met within that management system, and to be able to come and talk to people and make change. Because one of the things that we've found, we've done a lot of work with different projects, and one of the things we found that in order to get people to, where is it? Yeah, no, not that one. Sorry, I have like 3 presentations like this, but in order to get people to make changes in policy, government only listens to people to 2 things, money and votes. Fish don't have the votes, fish don't have the money, we don't have the money, but if we start to talk to the people, we can get the votes. And so it's about being able to make your science understandable to the people who can actually make change. It's about bringing it out to the audiences. It isn't just the supportive audiences like we have right now. It's being able to talk to people who don't necessarily agree with you. It's about being able to talk to people who just don't know, because in order to make change, you have to get public support, because that's the only way to actually change policy. Government says it governs by best available science, but it really governs by the science that they want to see. And making that change means trying to face the challenges in trying to work with partners to create the science. Some of it is funding shortfalls. We've all talked about how hard it is to find consistent funding. And when you create partnerships, like we've created a lot of partnerships with Secura, our Central Coast Indigenous Resource Alliance, the Great Bear Initiative, SFU, UBC, UNBC for different projects, and being able to come out earlier at the question stage. Because for everyone up until now, consultation has always been after all of the questions have been developed. They come to you, this is what I want to study. Well, that doesn't work for us, because that doesn't give us the opportunity to create the kind of questions that wouldn't be seen if they weren't working with First Nations. So we need to get in earlier within the system and talk to them when they're deciding on the questions. And so our work with Megan was a really good opportunity to show I don't think there's any scientist in Western science that started out purely from an academic perspective that would have thought about trying to find ways to plan for bears and people. It's just not within their thought processes. And that's not the only thought process that we need to change. So I think it's really important that we get out there and we start to talk to each other. We start to talk to people out on the street. And we found we were working on I was a part of the campaign to end the trophy hunt in the Great Bear Rainforest. It ended up succeeding in BC as well, but we were only involved in the Great Bear Rainforest. And a lot of it was looking at what were government's arguments. How do we counter that? How is the management system working? Are they meeting their objectives? They say that there's going to be this much funds put into the BC coffers by the trophy hunt. Is that the case? And when we did the research, it wasn't. There was a lot more money brought in by, I think it was 11 times more money brought in by ecotourism than there was by the hunt itself. Hunting brings in a lot of money, but the actual trophy hunting, where all they take are the head and the hands or the paws, which is the part that we had the problem with, really didn't bring in all that much, because they bring in people from other countries. They come in with all of their gear. They stay in a hotel or two, sure, but they don't come and buy a lot of stuff locally. So it wasn't as beneficial as they had said it was, but it's finding the answers to those questions and bringing them to the public, getting public opinion changed, and then policy will just follow after. And we've used this quite successfully in the Central Coast on quite a few things. We've done it with the bear hunt closure areas. We've done it with the crab closures, our marine use plans, our land use plans. What we have in place right now are our marine protected areas. We've been working with BC, the feds, all of the Great Bear Initiative nations, trying to create set-aside areas, marine protected areas within the territory. And we're hitting a few snags right now. And a part of that is just coming out and talking to people and telling them what the benefits are. If we protect the areas where their natal grounds are, then we will be protecting the species to be able to come off of those protected areas in areas that are able to be accessed by everybody else. And it's just trying to find ways to change people's minds, open everybody's eyes, and work together. And that's sort of a really abbreviated version.